When we spoke yesterday, a story, or my colleague Rachel Venables got involved in a story about cladding, it sparked off such a reaction from you that I realised to this story you must return. And Rachel's in the studio with me now to give us a background. Just remind everybody, first off, Rachel, what it was you were covering yesterday that got everyone to get in touch. Morning to you.
Good morning, Nick. Well, yesterday we were speaking about one tower block in North London which failed a cladding survey effectively. They found a series of dangerous...
This is all post-Grenfell, isn't it?
Post-Grenfell, yes. A cladding survey that needed to be carried out post-Grenfell, and it was going to take up to 42 months for the people in these flats, in this building, to be able to sell up. Now, since breaking that story on your show, I have been inundated. Hundreds of messages, people getting in touch from Kent, Birmingham, Manchester, Leeds, Cardiff, right across the country, all of them in similar situations. They are trapped in their flats, unable to sell homes, which have effectively been rendered worthless overnight. They've all been valued at zero because the building that they live in doesn't have a completed or passed ESW1 certificate, EWS1 certificate, apologies. Sebastian...
That's External Wall Survey number one, isn't it?
Survey. It's a new certificate that was brought in following on from the Grenfell tragedy. Sebastian O'Kelly is chief executive of the charity Leasehold Knowledge. He supports leaseholders and he thinks more than 1 million people could be in this situation.
We're looking at a perfect storm of disasters descending on the heads of people who own flats, and they are largely unsellable now because mortgage lenders want to know that the sites are safe, and most sites cannot demonstrate that they are safe. So you've got 900,000 to 1 million people living in blocks of flats that are higher than 18 metres, and all of them are impacted by this fire safety bill and the cladding crisis.
Now, the problem, Nick, is that after Grenfell and the realisation that thousands of buildings have similar, dangerous, expensive-to-remove cladding, last winter the Royal Institute for Chartered Surveyors introduced this EWS1, the External Wall Survey form, as a way of regulating and controlling the valuation process of high-rise flats. It was intended just for buildings over 18 metres high, but then government regulations changed in January, and now lenders are asking for this form for much shorter buildings as well, some with just scraps of cladding, but it has created a massive backlog. For example, I've been sent one email from a worker at Peabody, a huge housing association. They have more than 2,000 buildings, all of which need this survey carried out. They think it could be up to 10 years before all the work is done, which means there'll be a decade in which people are stuck in their unsellable homes. Now, O'Kelly tells me the problem is that only the freeholder can apply for these tests, and he says the job is just too big.
It's an expensive procedure. You know, it starts at about £40,000 to do a EWS1 survey of a high-rise block of flats, and there's not that many people in the country who can do it. We think there are fewer than 300 people with the relevant qualifications who could actually do this sort of survey.
Sebastian O'Kelly concluding Rachel Venables' report. Rachel, thank you. Let's turn to a legal expert. We're going to have some of your stories in a moment about this. Let's talk to a legal expert first. So Russell Conway is senior partner at Oliver Fisher Solicitors firm, a specialist in property law. Mr. Conway, thank you for coming on. What would your advice be to some of the people with whom my colleague has spoken? Morning to you.
Well, this is a disaster, but we talk about Grenfell, but this is a disaster that predates Grenfell. Remember the Lacanal House fire, which was 2009, was the beginning of all of this. And the coroner at the inquest on that disaster recommended that the government change its building regulations. Now, that was 5 or 6 years before Grenfell. Now, the government simply didn't do that. And what we've got now is this perfect storm where people are being asked for these EWS1 forms. The freeholders are unable to provide them because there's only 275 qualified fire engineers in the country who can do them. And this is a problem that, frankly, needs to be dealt with by the government because people can't remortgage, people can't sell, and people are frankly blighted. And there's very little that we as lawyers can do to help them because it's a surveying problem, it's an engineering problem, but it's a problem that's of the government's own making. And if they had taken heed of what the coroner had said at the Lacanal House fire, they could have resolved this problem 10 years ago, and they declined to do so.
Clarify one thing for me, if you would, Mr. Conway. Initially, this was for buildings or dwellings 18 metres and above. How has that been? That has now been changed, is that correct?
Yes, that's been changed. When you look at the EWS1 form, the form's quite simple, but what it says is it's for buildings over 18 metres or other buildings which may have combustible material. For instance, you could have a small 3-storey building with some wooden cladding on it or a wooden balcony, and the mortgagee, the mortgage company, may ask questions about that. And that would involve another EWS1 form, which would have to be signed off by the freeholder, and he could only sign it off when he'd had a full fire engineer's report. Some of these fire engineer reports can be extremely expensive. I've had people saying they're costing £26,000. And that's not the end of the story. Once you've got the report, if the report says there are combustible materials, the freeholder then has to remedy the problem before the mortgage company will lend on it.
But the freeholder can't, in some instances, remedy the problem, I imagine, because they live in certain apartment blocks or whatever. They can't start ripping the cladding off just their particular apartment, can they?
Absolutely. They can't just remedy it at a stroke, because who's going to pay for it? Yeah. Now, the accepted wisdom that it's the leaseholder that has to pay for it. But as a leaseholder, a lot of people simply won't have the money to pay quite considerable sums to do this.
Lastly, is there any sign of movement from this government about this?
The government has recently been talking to the mortgage industry and the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors. I think they're trying to get themselves out of the picture and trying to get this EWS1 form amended. But I don't think that's going to happen because, as I said at the beginning, this is a problem of the government's making. They should have amended the building regulations a long time ago, and they didn't do that.
Enjoyed speaking with you. Thank you. Russell Conway, Senior Partner at Oliver Fisher Solicitors, a specialist in this area. I said a lot of people involved. Kate is in East Moseley. How's this affected you, Kate? Good morning.
Good morning. Hi. So we're in a building that is under 18 metres.
Right.
It was an office block. It got converted to flats back in 2017, and we've been in here since. And it has cladding, but it has cladding just on a really, really small portion of the flat, so just on the lift shaft and the very top floor.
Yeah.
No balconies, no anything else. And we found a buyer to sell our property. We had a baby daughter in April.
Oh, congratulations.
So thank you. And so we're looking to move and...
Yeah, of course.
Have a bit more space for our daughter. And on Wednesday, the surveyor came round for the mortgage company. And Thursday night, we got an email to say that our flat is essentially worthless. We got returned in nil value.
God.
And so we can't move.
What have you? Now, you own it freehold, or you own a 99-year lease? You own leasehold. What are the leaseholders? Have your solicitors contacted the leaseholders?
Yeah, so we've contacted them, and they, to be honest, they were shocked as well that we needed it as well, and they were quite reluctant to try and get it for us because it's so expensive to get, and they don't see it as a legal requirement because we're under 18 metres, so there's no. At the moment, there's no sign that they're going to go and get it.
We just heard from that solicitor. It does, unfortunately, the government have changed it, and it does apply if you're under 18 metres.
Okay, well, that would be amazing if it is, but we don't know how long that's going to take. We're going to lose a buyer. We're going to lose the house that we found.
Oh my God!
That we found for our new family, and it's heartbreaking. It's been a rough year.
Yeah.
Apart from the birth of our daughter, and. Yeah, we're heartbroken by it.
Well, of course you're. Lastly, are there other people then? Are you in a development, or you're in a sole house, or does this affect other people?
Yeah, so there are other flats. There's a block of 20.
Oh, right, so everyone's affected.
Yeah, everyone's affected, and we're the first ones to sell since this new regulation, but we know other people are wanting to sell, and yeah, so it affects all of us.
I mean, I'm going to say good luck, which is the most empty words. I can't think of anything else to say. I just hope it works out, and that's... And obviously with a baby, you're desperate to move out. Well, we will keep as much pressure as we can from here and just see if there can be some change of heart. There's more stories, I think.